Latin American country, and I deliberately chose to come here to Mexico, in part to show solidarity with the Mexican Jewish community and to support the community, which impresses me for its dynamism, its cohesion, and just the richness of Jewish life here in Mexico. So my first objective was, again, to meet the leadership of the Mexican Jewish community and to show solidarity with the community. My second objective was to strengthen and support U.S.-Mexican relations. You know, at a time of great controversy in the U.S. about our policies, the fact of the matter is that many of us, most of us, the vast majority of Americans, have deep appreciation for the people of Mexico and for the priority of U.S.-Mexican relations, economic relations. Many of us are involved in businesses that have offices here, or trading between the two countries, or investing between the two countries. Cultural relations, again, I think there is a very robust interchange of Mexican culture in the United States, and I think to an extent to here as well.
You just celebrated Cinco de Mayo.
El Tercer, my third son, he was born on Cinco de Mayo. So for me, it is, every year it is a holiday, for many reasons. And then thirdly, the familial ties. Again, as I was saying to you a few minutes ago, I know many members of, not many, but I know several members of the Mexican Jewish community in the United States. I have staff who come from this community, and there's great links, personal links. So I think the personal ties, the cultural exchange, and the social interplay, and the economic and commercial like links, mean that whatever the politics may be, politics come and go. We're talking about a chain that I think is very tight. So my second purpose was that, and so we had the opportunity to meet with members of the government, including Undersecretary Caso, Senor Sada, and of course Minister I'm not going to say it correctly. And so for these reasons, I was really pleased, because in particular the third issue that we discussed in depth with Videgaray and with Sada, that I had discussed with your ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Gutierrez, the day before, is the rise we have seen in the United States of anti-immigrant, anti-Mexican bias. So the ADL does three things in the U.S. We do advocacy with the Congress and with our courts to try to change the laws or create new ones to protect minorities and preserve our First Amendment rights of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. This is because we were founded to protect the Jewish people and to defend all other people. That's our mission. We have a dual mission. So we do that by engaging with governments at the federal, state, and local level, as well as through the courts. And we speak out. We use our voice. Secondly, the ADL focuses on education programs. We're one of the largest providers in the United States of anti-bias, anti-hate content in schools. About 1.5 million children use ADL content and receive ADL content in their classrooms every year. And then thirdly, we work with law enforcement to investigate hate crimes, to help them understand. We have a research apparatus that analyzes the extremists, and then we train them on how to deal with hate. We train about 15,000 officers every year. How to deal with the hate. What is a hate crime? Why is it different than an ordinary crime? How do you deal with the victims of a hate crime? How do you track and report it effectively to the FBI? This is all very germane because through our regional offices, often we're the first call when there's a hate crime. When a synagogue is defaced, when a Jewish person is assaulted, but also when a black person is attacked, or a Latino or Hispanic person is harassed. Often we get a call. What I've come to understand, as we've seen an increase in these bias incidences and hate crimes since November of last year, a marked increase, in particular targeting the Jewish community.
More than the Latino or the Muslim minorities?
We do not have statistics that are as good on the others. But I certainly believe more than the Muslim community. And I'm inclined, I don't know the numbers vis-a-vis the immigrant and the Mexicans. Look, this past quarter, January, February, March, we had nearly as many incidences of harassment at U.S. schools as we did in all of 2016 against Jewish kids.
Wow.
I'm talking about swastikas, I'm talking about vandalism, I'm talking about harassment in the classroom or after school. It's bad. There's a tense environment in the U.S. right now. So, what I learned from Ambassador Gutierrez, well actually we knew this before, several Mexican consulates had reached out to ADL and said, can you help us with training? We have done 3 trainings at consulates across the country. And I got a note yesterday, we're doing a 4th training at the Kansas City consulate. What we discussed a bit with Ambassador Gutierrez, but in depth with Mr. Videgaray, was very enthusiastic, is taking our trainings and scaling it across all 50 consulates across the United States. Trainings to help consular officials understand how to do intake when a call comes in. Because many of the immigrants, and these could be people who are not yet citizens, these could be people who are citizens, are afraid to call the authorities. They're afraid they're going to be questioned. They're afraid their status is going to be, they'll be interrogated. And so their consulates are getting a number of phone calls. So we are eager to provide training to help the consulates better handle these situations. So I think that's a very exciting development that we had not anticipated. But our hope would be to share our expertise, to do hands-on training, to make it easier for Mexican consular officials to both handle the incoming calls, to prepare their staff to reach out to understand what's happening, and then to track the information more effectively. What was your name again, sir?
Emilio.
Emilio, to Emilio's question, how did the numbers against Jewish people compare to Mexicans or Muslims? We don't have good data, particularly on the immigrants. We don't know. And so the Mexican consulates could play a very critical role just in the tracking. So I'm very excited about what I see as an opportunity for a robust collaboration that would allow your consuls, or your consulates, and your government to do its job in protecting your citizens and your compatriots abroad, and syncs with our mission, which is to fight discrimination. And I'll say in closing, I am very impressed by the commitment of President Peña Nieto and Minister Videgaray, and I heard the same thing from the ambassador, the commitment to support the Jewish community here in Mexico City. And so the fact that this government has already been good to the Jewish community, the fact this government stood up on Holocaust Remembrance Day, frankly, it's quite startling to see when you walk into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On the one hand, you have the court and then the Museum of Tolerance. I mean, it's an interesting sort of metaphor. Intentional or unintentional. About the fact that you have the law here, and then what happens when the law is abused here. And then in between, since this ministry, which is doing so much to ensure that your people are adequately protected. So if we can be helpful, we want to be. You know, anti-Semitism is often only the first form of bigotry. And we're seeing that in the United States, and so we want to do whatever we can to stop it.
Speaking about a little bit about what's going on back in the United States, specifically the political extremes.
I think that it is fair to say that no political party is exempt from intolerance. And there's cause for concern in the United States on both ends of the political spectrum. By the way, you see this abroad too. In the UK, the leader of the opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, and major people in the party like Ken Livingstone and others are unrepentantly anti-Israel and excuse and apologize terrible anti-Semitism that results from their anti-Israel rhetoric. And then you see on continental Europe, in places like France, in places like Eastern Europe, an alignment between the rise in populism and the historic anti-Semitism which has always been there. And look, I will say Marine Le Pen has tried to downplay anti-Semitism, but her father is a...
worst anti-Semitism.
Yeah, I mean, he's extraordinary in his... He's extraordinary in his intolerance and hate. And you see this in other parties in Eastern Europe as well. So coming to the US, I'm less worried about the people who are in power, and I'm more worried about the forces around them. So some have said, is Donald Trump an anti-Semite? No, I don't think he's not. He is not. The challenge becomes during his campaign, the rhetoric that he allowed and tolerated.
And the dog whistling.
All of the dog whistling, you all know what that means, right? Signaling things were okay in ways that they are absolutely not okay. So why did he tolerate this or even engage in this? It is difficult to understand. But unquestionably, we saw, particularly ADL's very focused on cyber hate. We're very focused on social media and the slander on social media. And we could see a correlation between campaign rallies and anti-Semitic abuse online. So, and as some of these extreme elements on the right are mainstreamed or normalized, it's very troubling. Then on the left, you absolutely have elements on the left in the US which are also very troubling. Now, whereas the extremists on the right sort of exhibit classic racialist anti-Semitism, the extremists on the left traffic in politically correct anti-Semitism, masquerading it as anti-Israel. But in fact, when you just peel back the veneer, you quickly understand that anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. Now, to be fair, there's nothing wrong with taking issue with particular policies of the Israeli government. I take issue with policies of the American government. I take issues with policy of other governments. It doesn't mean I'm fundamentally opposed to the legitimacy of those governments. But if you look at those who stand up and speak out against Israel in the worst kind of ways, bereft of fact, not grounded in information, they seek to delegitimize the state. They seek to demonize all Israelis. They hold Jews to a double standard. And we see this on our college campuses, where the boycott, divestment, sanctions movements tried to get resolutions passed. A typical one was that happened at a major university in New England a couple weeks ago, where the pro or the anti-Israel students scheduled a vote on a BDS resolution on Erev Pesach, knowing the Jewish students wouldn't be there, intentionally doing it when they wouldn't be around. Now, like I can tell you, you wouldn't schedule an anti-Catholic vote on Lent, or like the eve of, Good Friday, and you wouldn't schedule something of interest to the Muslim community on the eve of Ramadan. So this is really troubling. And there are folks like Linda Sarsour who on the one hand are raising money for Jewish cemeteries, on the other hand, she's pro-anti-normalization.
She published a piece on the New York Times saying you can't be a feminist and be a Zionist.
Right, I mean, so I find this really, really bad.
And as you say, she also contributes to protecting Jewish cemeteries, so it's really a very thin line.
Yeah, but I think the challenge
It's like
becomes,
a facade.
what I'll say is that, like, with the fundraising for the cemetery, and just so you well know, there was a series of bomb threats against the Jewish community. We learned the perpetrator was actually an Israeli, but still, over almost 170 Jewish community centers and day schools and my offices got 6 bomb threats. Like, irregardless of who the perpetrator is, the impact, the frightened parents, the terrified children, the shaking elderly people, the impacts are anti-Semitism. And we had a series of desecrations of cemeteries. Now, we've had some desecrations of cemeteries before, but not in line like that. It was like a virus that was moving throughout the community. And so she raised money with other Muslims for it, which is an admirable thing to do that should be applauded. I only wish the St. Louis community had taken half of the money that she raised and put it toward cleaning up the headstones, and taken the other half of the money and put it toward cleaning up the language. Right? To demonstrate that delegitimizing Jews is just as bad as destroying Jewish headstones. I care as much about the Jews who are alive as the Jews who are dead. And so I think we should ask for, we should start with ourselves, and we should ask our allies and others to show the kind of respect for one another that we try to show for them. So, you know, I understand those who are very focused on what's happening right now in the Trump administration, because it seems as if some extremist elements, Linda Sarsour is on the margins. She may be, and there may be folks in the progressive circles, okay, who are making a lot of noise, but they're not in power. I understand those who are concerned. We're more focused with those who are in power. But we have no choice but to be vigilant in terms of all of it. And at the ADL, we strive not to be political, but to be principled. I don't care how you vote, I care what you value. And so we are not going to stop speaking our truth, regardless of the consequences. Because, look, my job description is very simple. It's protect the Jewish people. What we have found in the US is that when we make America good for the Jews, it's good for all minorities. And when America is good for all minorities, it's also good for the Jews. I think there's that equation, I think, that proof has application in other countries like here.
I don't want to push it back to the US, but
It's okay.
the day before James Comey was fired by President Trump, he gave a remarkable speech at ADL.
Yeah, he did.
What is your reading of the current news regarding Comey
Well,
and the rule of law?
so FBI Director Comey, who did give his last sort of public address at the ADL meeting, you know, the FBI, I think, is an organization, branch of the government, an arm of the government of tremendous integrity. And I think he was a man of integrity. It is the president's prerogative to hire and fire people. And some staff require confirmations by the U.S. Senate, like ambassador positions, or members of the cabinet, and some don't, like the FBI director. So he's entitled to do so. It seems like we're still trying to understand what was the logic, the rationale. It does seem like the process was a bit flawed.
And the timing.
Timing is a bit. So I think there are a lot of unanswered questions. So I would simply say that we have a great deal of respect for the FBI. We had a great working relationship with former Director Comey. I respect the President's right to hire and fire staff, and we're waiting, like everyone else, to have these questions answered to try to better understand what happened and why it happened. Look, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu and the elected government of Israel has a job, which is to protect the citizens and preserve the nation-state of Israel. And so those of us in diaspora can be supportive and have a relationship with Israel, but ultimately, you know, we aren't the ones responsible for its affairs. With that said, we also need to recognize that Prime Minister Netanyahu and the nation-state of Israel, its actions can sometimes have repercussions for communities in the diaspora, like here in Mexico. For example, the tweet that happened in January. We have an office in Jerusalem, and the ADL is in frequent touch with the government, with the Israeli government. We try to be as supportive as we can be, and you know, at times when we don't agree about an issue, we'll communicate that, sometimes in private and sometimes in public. But I think that it is a delicate balance. How do you show support effectively for the state of Israel,
Yes.
which is under siege in so many ways, which faces radical Islam in the north with ISIS, radical Islam, that would be the northeast. To the north was Hezbollah, to the south with ISIS on that border, on Sinai, to sort of the southwest with Hamas and Gaza. I mean, look, these are very difficult challenges in a very unstable region. At the same time, you know, we hope that they will continue to thrive as a vibrant, pluralistic democracy that respects the rule of law and respects freedom of expression and the rights of all of its citizens, Jewish, Arab, Reform, Conservative, everyone. And that's the case we make with the government. I think part of the reason why the American Jewish community is so confident and strong, and this may have application here, I'm not sure, is because we have a sovereign Jewish state of Israel. I mean, Israel is a miracle. It's a miracle in every way. And this year, 1967, we should celebrate the miracle of its survival facing extraordinary odds in 1967. That said, from time to time, when the interests of a community in the diaspora and the interests of the nation state of Israel don't necessarily completely align, I think that we need to find respectful ways to deal with that and to communicate that. Sometimes in public, sometimes in private, sometimes formally, sometimes informally. So there's no hard and fast rule. Every case needs to be evaluated on an individual basis in the context of understanding the privilege and miracle that is Israel and the sensitivities vis-a-vis the situation they face. We do find in the United States the communities, the cities with the largest Jewish populations, New York, Los Angeles, Miami, Washington, D.C., Chicago, tend to have a higher incidence of anti-Semitic incidences, which is interesting. So there seems to be some correlation between large Jewish communities in metropolitan areas and actual incidences of anti-Semitism.
Do you think that anti-Semitism would still exist?
Yes, I think that anti-Semitism is not the fault of the Jews. I mean, anti-Semitism is a virus that's been part of the human condition for thousands of years. Jews, for any number of reasons, for any number of excuses, have been a convenient scapegoat and target for majoritarian populations. We have been a minority that has been easy to segregate and to threaten and to use as an excuse for all kinds of ills. Political ills, social ills, economic ills, etc., etc., etc. So I think our job at the ADL, in terms of protecting the Jewish people, we find that education is the best antidote to anti-Semitism. Because one of the challenges the Jewish community has had for so long is I do not think we have been well understood. And we have been mischaracterized by elements of those majoritarian populations. That could have been the church, that could have been people in elected office, that could have been people in the equivalent of the media or culture. So it is up to us to do what we can to educate young people and inculcate in them the fact that no matter how you pray, or where you're from, or how you look, or who you love, that we're all the same. And I think that is really the only proven strategy to mitigating anti-Semitism and other forms of bias is by increasing levels of awareness among these majorities that we have much more in common than that which keeps us apart. It's been my first trip, but I hope it's not my last. I've been really impressed by the hospitality and warmth of everyone that we've met here, from the Comité Central to Tribuna Israelita to all the members of the different communities, and to see the accomplishments of this Mexican Jewish community, to see that there's extraordinary, I don't even want to call them structures because that seems to understate what they are. They're like systems. The sports complex, the schools, the synagogues. I don't know if you realize, but as someone who's visited Jewish communities in other parts of the world, and all over the United States, you have something incredibly, singularly special here. It is unique, it is vibrant, and look, it may have its challenges, and you may have your moments, and you may have your downs, but your ups are pretty high up. In a moment when we see intermarriage rates at astronomical levels in the US, at times when we see Jews assimilating into majoritarian cultures in places like Europe, in times when we see the gravitational kind of pull of secularism, what you have here, even for the fact that you are somewhat isolated, what you have here is really profoundly special. And so it might not be perfect, and you may be able to perfect it, but I would treasure it. I would really, really treasure it, because I think it's really, really something